really is about this belief system that human life ends at death. And so therefore we have to kind of make the most of this life by experiencing everything that is on this earth. So that's what makes a worthwhile life, and that's the only thing that becomes like a noble pursuit then in this particular life, when this is all we have, which actually is very contrary to our Christian faith. Like, we know that there is a life after death as well, that it doesn't end when life on earth ends. So I guess that kind of then, the bucket list in that sense actually stands in opposition to our faith.
Right.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Living Fullness. I'm Stina Constantine, and joining me on the podcast is Father Sean Burns. Each week you'll hear us chat about a range of topics, from nurture to relationships, comments on cultural shifts and lessons that we're learning as we go along, and we are so excited to have you join us. So sit back and enjoy being part of a conversation with a couple of friends. Hello, Padre. How are you going?
Very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing well.
That's
Welcome back to
way.
season 4.
Season 4.
Dang, how did you get here?
How did we get here?
Yeah, how did we get here?
How did we get here? Well, you drove and
Stop
I.
it. Well, yes, because we are recording from the cathedral today.
We are recording from the cathedral today. We're in my office. And
we're just going to hope there's no emergencies that you need to run away from today.
that's right. That's right. I have a sign on my door that says, please don't disturb unless it's urgent.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and then do not hesitate.
every time I hear the faint ring of a phone, I'm thinking, any minute now.
That door will get knocked down.
But how do we get here? Look, it's a journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's been a real journey to season 4.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot.
Yes.
We've learned a lot.
Yes.
Like everything from how to podcast, right, which we're still learning.
Yeah.
Every time we do an episode, like, we wind up learning something more about the thing
yeah.
that we're talking about, which is just
100%.
awesome. So
yeah, it's good fun.
So yeah, it is good fun. Yeah.
So we're going to reserve the conversation around how has the break been for our Patreon supporters. So if you'd like to hear what the last sort of few weeks have been like, go over to our Patreon and check out our Patreon video where we catch you up on what these last 5 weeks of break has been like for us.
Indeed.
So this particular episode, first one back, Padre, what are we going to talk about today?
Bucket lists. Bucket lists, you see. And so
Buckets and buckets of lists.
Buckets and buckets of lists. Or lists of buckets. But I don't know. So Bishop Mark Edwards, the Bishop of our diocese, he and I were sitting down recently for dinner or breakfast. I can't remember which one. They all kind of blend into each other. But we're sitting down for a meal at the cathedral, and he brought up a podcast called When the Church Stops Working with Andrew Root. And on this particular episode, the hosts brought up the notion of the bucket list. And Bishop proposed that this would be a good episode for Living Fullness to do. So, Bishop, this one is for you.
Woohoo.
So, bucket lists. Firstly, I guess let's start with what the podcasters had to say, Andrew Root and his companion had to say about bucket lists. So, the first thing to note is that they reference a film called The Bucket List, and they're like, starring Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones. You're killing me here. Jack Nicholson, man. Jack Nicholson.
That's correction number 1.
And it's the only one I have to offer. And indeed, the idea of this film is this is what sort of brought the bucket list into sort of mainstream culture. I think that's that. They make that observation. I think by and large is quite true. Like that film happened, and then everyone had a bucket list, and it's something that's sort of remained as well.
It's kind of stuck.
It's kind of stuck. Yeah.
And I guess part of the idea of a bucket list is sort of this comes from this idea that we've all experienced the world getting a bit smaller and getting a bit more accessible. So everything's generally in the Western world, at least, places are a lot more accessible to get to. So travel's a lot easier. And we're also hyper aware of what is available out there and what other people are able to access. And so naturally then what happens is we go, oh, well, I would like to be able to go there too. I'd like to be able to see that too. I'd like to be able to do that too.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that sense that kind of comes in with this idea of a bucket list or a list of things that we'd like to experience in life. And there's a couple of things that the podcasters sort of mention as well, in this particular episode. And one of them, he says, in some ways, human life becomes a stacking of experiences, and there doesn't need to be a coherence to that. That life doesn't need a narrative. It's about checking off a box. So it becomes this kind of shopping list, if you like, of things that we have to get and kind of consume.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I actually think that was a very keen insight on their part. To me, this becomes part of the supermarket mentality with which present Western culture has become so obsessed. I can have what I want when I want, and that will make me happy, but I can have what I want when I want without any expense to other things that I want. I can have my cake and eat it too sort of mentality, right? And this actually reminds me of something that John Paul II said in Pastores Dabo Vobis, number 5 or 6, one of the early numbers. Prisoners of the fleeting moment. They seek to consume the strongest and most gratifying individual experiences at the level of immediate emotions and sensations, inevitably finding themselves indifferent and paralyzed, as it were, when they come face to face with the summons to embark upon a life project which includes a spiritual and religious dimension and a commitment to solidarity. Now, if you've heard me quote that passage before, it's because it's one of my favorite passages from John Paul II, and it's a really good one. But I think one of the things that the hosts of the podcast really do sort of hit upon is that the bucket list mentality works to reinforce this notion of the consumption of the strongest and most gratifying experiences in an attempt to substitute an isolated experience for meaning and purpose, which calls us to communion and sacrifice. It's almost like the aiming for the isolated experience, which will give us a moment of happiness, becomes the substitution for the meaning and purpose that we're all called to have, that leads us to communion with other people and leads us to a sacrificial dimension in our human lives. So I think that is actually quite a good point about the notion of a bucket list, is that it has these isolated experiences that don't have, as they rightly point out there, a narrative dimension. And so life becomes more about the sum of experience rather than genuine human and divine connection, which provides a meaning that is unique to the human person. Yeah.
One of the other things that they say in their episode, which I thought was really cool, is I'll just quote them. They said, modern man's way of coping with his finitude. That's kind of what the bucket list is. And I guess I'm sensing that same thing, because it really is about this belief system that human life ends at death. And so therefore we have to kind of make the most of this life by experiencing everything that is on this earth. So that's what makes a worthwhile life. And that's the only thing that becomes like a noble pursuit then in this particular life, when this is all we have, which actually is very contrary to our Christian faith. Like, we know that there is a life after death as well, that it doesn't end when life on earth ends. So I guess that kind of then, the bucket list in that sense actually stands in opposition to our faith.
Right. Andrew makes this very point. He says that it also seems to be a way of trying to avoid the reality of death. Sort of, clocking up experiences becomes a way of dealing with death without actually dealing with it, is the point they make. And I can remember years ago when I was at uni, we had a chaplain take our college on a long walk up one of the hills at uni. And I think for our American listeners, for us, college is a different thing for you guys. So I think for you guys, college is like year 11 and 12. Whereas for us, a college is sort of a residential place normally. Sometimes it's a high school. Sometimes it's a high school. But frequently it's also a residential place for tertiary places. So for me, this was a residential college, and for university, and we were staying there. I was staying there here in Wagga, and our chaplain took us all on this really long walk up one of the hills at the university, and because
they're quite steep
they're really you went there yeah. So it was it's wide open land and very it's an agricultural college as much as it is a business college or a medical imaging college. It's built on the back of agriculture, so it's a very broad ranging hills and almost mountainous ranges,
Almost.
It's probably exaggerating a touch there, but you feel like it when you're going up some of these hills,
Sure.
And so we walked up this hill, and then Father was going to give us a talk at the end. And so we got up there and we all sat down on the ground, and he's giving us this talk. And he began his talk like this: "We're all going to die."
At the top of this hill?
It's like, okay, well, that's one way to inspire us, I guess. Right. And so and we were all like, what? Like, what do you mean we're all going to die? And the reaction of the whole cohort was one of absolute disbelief. Like, why would you say that? Why would you say we're all going to die?
Yeah.
Yet it's one of the most fundamental truths that we've kind of got to confront is, we're all going to die. And whilst that probably was not necessarily the most prudent way to engage with us, it was true. Yeah. And it remains true. We're all going to die. So death is generally it's not something that we're ready to deal with as a culture. We rather seek to kind of push the reality off to the side and indulge in a disconnected experience, as though that disconnected experience somehow enables us to deal with death.
Right.
And so it's
as
kind
if
of
that somehow is the way to deal. Like that's the healthy way to cope with what's happening.
I'm dealing with death because I'm clocking up all these experiences and I'm leading a life well lived. And I look at and they also make this same point. I look at my parents. I look at people who've my mother, who's in her, I don't want to say. I'm concerned Mum's going to listen to this and be like, I'm how old?
Excuse me?
So she's in her 70s. And Mum, I'm a bad son, aren't I? I can't tell you how old my mum is.
It's a good thing you're not sharing her age
So
with everyone.
that's right.
You're a good
that's
son.
right. So my mum has never travelled overseas because she's terrified of flying. She doesn't know how to swim, so she won't sail. And so she's just not interested in overseas travel.
Yeah.
She's not interested in skydiving. She doesn't want to go bungee jumping.
Yep.
And yet she has lived a markedly full life by the standards of, I've raised a family.
Yeah.
I've fallen in love with a man and married him and had 51, 52 years of awesome marriage. Yeah. It's an incredible life. For her, she has led a full life.
Yeah. And
she's led a full life because her life has been lived in communion and in sacrifice. And that has really meant something to reduce a life down to experiences.
Yeah.
Is to cheapen the notion of what our lives are actually meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess too, like life is made up of experiences. There are lots of different experiences. But I guess when it comes to a bucket list, we're kind of looking for a particular, extraordinary experience that we wouldn't have in whatever ordinary life circumstance that we have. We're looking for something outside of where life currently has us.
Yes.
So it's always that external adding into, and even thinking about my own attitudes toward bucket lists, I suppose. I remember when it came up when I was still a child, like that's where the bucket list first came into my mind, I suppose, from friends talking about it and so on. And I've never really been all that interested in a bucket list.
Sure.
And part of that, I think, is because of the opposite of what your mum's experienced, where my parents used to travel a lot as children. My parents would take us to all sorts of different countries partly because they were financially able to then travel and they wanted to see different things, but also because it was important to my parents that we understood that there was a bigger world out there than the one that we could see. There were people out there who weren't as well off as we were, and they wanted us to know, and they wanted to teach us different things. And they also wanted to connect us with family. So we traveled to go and meet with aunts and uncles who lived in other places and so on. But it meant that travel was one of those things that I was used to as a child. I just grew up with that. But along with that, because it was overseas travel, I spent a lot of time in transit. So I learnt from a child what it meant to sit and contemplate on something, just sit and think about the one thing and talk to God about the one thing for hours. Because that's all you can do when you're in transit. Before the days of having a tablet. Like that's all you had. So that's just what you did. And then, occasionally annoying your little sister and occasionally getting irritated with her and so on. But other than that, that's pretty much all you could do at the time. So I didn't really have a bucket list as such until the language of a bucket list came into being when friends started asking about what are your hopes and dreams? Like where do you want to travel? What do you want to see? So the bucket list became the language that I would use to communicate, well, there's probably that place that I'd like to get to someday and maybe to go and see, this particular landmark or something or, whatever it might be. So it's purely based on travel. As the thing that would be the checklist, if you like. But really, even now, I don't really have a bucket list now as much as I have like a hopes and dreams board. Like it gives me a bit of a visual reminder really of the kind of mission that I feel God has called me into in this life, what he really wants out of me and out of my life. So for me, that means first and foremost, what does it mean to be an authentic Christian? And the things that fall under that with the personal mission that God has in store for me. So that could include like some practical skills. So maybe it's about sustainability in ministry, like finances, or maybe it's also related to generosity in life, finances as well, or maybe there's particular skills, like as a therapist, for a period of time there was couples therapy was on my vision board as something that I felt God was calling me to. So that's a skill I would need to learn in order to be able to achieve this particular aspect of ministry that I felt called to. But then also other elements as well, like being, which aren't so practical, they're a bit more internal, I suppose, more of a disposition that I also need to foster. So that could be wanting to be fruitful in life, which means that I need to have an openness to receive from God. Also means, things like if I want to build a community around me, then I need to be able to foster a level of healthy relationships in the communities that I have around me, but also a level of hospitality if I'd like to welcome people into my space. So they're not things that I would necessarily call a tick box because I can go to a place, see a thing, and then I've done it, or I've gone to this thing and completed a task and therefore I've done it. They're more things that actually align with what my mission and call is in life that God has placed in me. Some of those things being practical things, others being a very spiritual thing, which is a growth season by season. So there's still experiences, they're just not experiences the way the bucket list would call to.
I kind of like that too. That's the idea of a goals and vision board, the idea of a, sort of placing your values and your beliefs at the core level, and to see, well, okay, how can I live life in accord with these things, and how do I see that going, and what areas do I need to grow in? And that's actually really cool. I've just, as you've been talking, I've just been thinking about, you've used the word bucket list a few times. And the whole point of bucket list is he kicked the bucket. Right? To say that he died, he kicked the bucket. Well, what a... That's just not nice. I mean, it's just, it's not a nice way to talk about death at all. So sorry,
it's just the whole. What is it? Remember your death, memento mori.
Oh yes.
It's like the whole.
Yes.
That's not what that's about. Like, this is not the way to go about remembering your death. It's not about going and achieving all these checklists. That's not what that's for. It's actually remembering that we have a much greater call on this earth. We have a greater purpose than these minute experiences.
Yeah.
Those things may be exciting and they may be fun and may,
Yeah.
nothing necessarily wrong with having a desire to experience some of those things.
Absolutely.
I just think we get into murky territory when we think that is the be all and end all of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the other thing about your approach here is that it necessarily, from a Christian perspective, it would necessarily include a preparation for the next life.
100%.
Like that's and it reminds me of a cathedral. I think it's in Rome. I've not been there myself, so I'm not 100% sure. But it's not a cathedral. Sorry, it's a church, and it's a church for our Protestant brothers and sisters. You're going to be like, what? And I get it, dude. I totally get it. I'm going to freak you out a little bit here. Be chill. It's a church built out of the skulls and bones of monks, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's or not the whole church built out of it, but like the inner walls are lined with them, right? And so, and there's a plaque on that which reads, I think it's in Latin, but in English it reads, "What you are, I once was. What I am, one day you will be."
Yes. Yes.
and it's apparently incredibly sobering when you when you walk in there and you read this plaque and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Reality check. I'm going to die.
Yeah.
So, and so it is actually ordered towards, it can be ordered towards the reality of death and the reality that we're all going to die and we're all going to one day face God.
Yeah.
And that's a helpful thing to keep in mind. And that this life is temporal, the next life is eternal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Word. It's almost like we're sitting with this live a life of no regret kind of attitude of wanting to be able to tick all these things off, do all these things so that we've maximized on the time that we have on this earth. But I think as a Christian, also thinking beyond what experiences will I regret rather than thinking what experiences will I regret not having had on this earth. What experiences would make my God sad?
Yeah, okay.
In the next life if I didn't actually get to it, if you wanted that for me and I was too preoccupied with these external experiences rather than the life that he actually has in store for me.
Actually, that's,
So thinking beyond, in a way that the notion of a bucket list in terms of the motivation that might sit behind it of wanting to lead a fulfilling life, that's not a bad thing, but to go beyond this life, don't leave the goal for the end of this life.
Absolutely.
Leave it as how do we actually go to the end goal, the end goal of being in heaven with God. Like how do we become a saint? That's the end goal. So create your own board or vision board or bucket list or whatever it is. Create a map, if you like, for your life of how you can get to that beyond life on this earth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that a lot. Yeah.
So some solutions, some other alternatives. I don't know.
Sure.
I guess we've kind of covered some of that already in terms of moving a bucket list, if you like, away from the places that we want to go or the things that we want to do and moving it into the kind of person that we'd like to be and the experiences that we might need to have to help us grow into becoming that person. So, and that also means that our bucket list has to change. Like the vision that we have needs to be something that's not fixed. So it can't be things like, well, I'm going to skydive or I'm going to go and swim with sharks. That's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
Because that's and that will never change until it's ticked off. Because what impact does that have on the type of person that we want to become? What value add does that have to the type of person that we want to become? But also if it's inflexible, then there's very little room for growth. And who's in control? So if we want our lives to be offered back up to God, if we want him to have full reign of our lives, then we also need to hand our bucket list over to him to allow him to do whatever it is that he wants to get us to that place of
Yes,
holiness
absolutely.
that He's got in store for us.
Absolutely. Another thing might be to focus on some relational goals and aims, relationships with others, with God, relationship with ourselves, our body, mind, soul, our personal healing. Like that's some good stuff. And it's great to be able to articulate those, because in the end, those are the goals that are actually going to bring us a sense of peace, a sense of joy, and a sense of peace and joy that isn't circumstantial, right? A sense of peace and joy that transcends the circumstances, that we might even have peace and joy in moments of turbulence and sadness. Like that's something really awesome. So to have that sort of relational aims and goals on one's bucket list, or to use a better word, one's goals and vision board. I think that I like that better.
Yeah.
I just like that better. It's I think that's those are worthwhile things. And as you rightly say, it's not like you can't put on there, I'd like to skydive. Yeah, okay, look, cool. That's no worries at all.
Yeah.
Have some experiences on there by all and every means, but perhaps don't allow that list to be this exclusively experience oriented thing. Like, it's okay to say, I'd like to skydive. It's even okay to have a piece of paper that has written on it, I'd like to skydive.
Yes.
Although I think skydiving is for crazy people.
We'll talk about this another time.
So I mean, honestly, who goes up in the
let's
air
not do this.
and says, you know what? I'm getting on a plane and then I'm going to jump out of the plane. I'm going to jump out of the plane. No, it's a plane. We stay in planes. We don't jump out. Anyway, I'm sorry. Rant over. I'm sorry.
We will
I apologize.
have this conversation another day.
Okay. All right.
For another episode.
Sorry. I'm ranting at this point, and I'm deeply apologetic for anyone who likes skydiving. But I think it's important that that we don't see those experiences as the meaning of our lives, as the thing which define a life well lived.
A singular
Yeah. I mean, you want to do it because it'd be cool. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, sure.
I get that.
Sure.
Well, actually, I don't. But not
with skydiving, you don't. But there might be some other things.
There might be some other thing, right? Yeah. So, I think a goals and vision board says that our life is deeper than some isolated experiences.
Yeah.
So, and that it's geared. Our lives are geared towards relationality.
Yeah. And even that, like peace and joy that you were talking about there too, or even the exhilaration that can come from some of these more adventurous things that people might have on their bucket list. There's nothing like wrong with wanting to have a little bit of fun, a bit of extra joy. Peace is good. Like, want that in your life. That's really good. But even that excitement and that exhilaration, there's nothing wrong with wanting a bit of that periodically in and out of your life. It's a fun thing. Like, we're not saying get rid of everything that's joyful and fun in your life. Like, that's not the life of holiness. No, it is. Use that stuff. But I would say, like, because there is nothing necessarily wrong with them, I would ask, are there things on the bucket list that you feel this is the only way that you'll experience that peace or that joy or that exhilaration? Is there no other way that you would gain peace and joy and that excitement? Because then I have to ask the question, well, why do we need those experiences?
Right.
Why can't we be content with joy and peace and excitement in other ways in our lives? Is there no other way that we can gain those? Because that becomes problematic.
It does. And I think part of that is I think part of the whole bucket list mentality then is probably also fed a little bit by social media.
Yeah.
Where we see somebody else's life and we're like, oh, wow, wouldn't that be cool? They look so peaceful and joyful, and they look like they're having such an awesome time. You're like, I want my life to be like that. So I'm going to have as many of those experiences as I can. And like, dude, that's just, what do they say? Comparison is the thief of joy, right? Those experiences in and of themselves are not going to provide us with the joy and the peace that we're looking for. Just because it looks good on somebody else's life doesn't mean it's going to change ours in any meaningful way, other than to say that I was crazy enough to jump out of a plane. You know, so
Yeah, I was rich enough to travel.
So
then.
I was, yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's the end of episode 1 of season 4, bucket lists.
Yeah. Okay. And thank you very much to Andrew Root and your co-host. And please, and I'm so sorry, I don't know the co-host's name. I'm so sorry. Whoever the co-host is, I don't know your name. I'm really apologetic for that. That sucks. I'm sorry. It's not that I didn't look for it.
No, we actually did look for it, but
It's
we couldn't
not that I
find
didn't
the
look
name.
for it. But thank you very much for your episode, because that really got us thinking about it. Got our bishop thinking about it
Yeah,
too,
100%.
which is really cool. So you guys did great work there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a truth, beauty, and goodness before we leave this episode, Padre.
Yes, you first.
Me first. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I suppose it's a new season, and also new seasons in some of my friends' lives, because there are babies abound.
Okay.
There are lots of little newborns around at the moment, which has been really delightful. There's just something really, and first-time mums as well, first-time mums and dads. It's been really beautiful to watch first-time parents learning and forming their own community around them. And I had this one person the other day where we were sitting around talking to this new dad, and we just, said to this new dad, I think I may have asked him, so how are you adjusting to being a new dad? How's that coming along? And he goes, you know what? This is perhaps the most normal thing I've ever done in my life. What? Like, tell us more about that. And he goes, everything else in life, yeah, sure, there were some other things that were ordinary and normal, but being a dad, like, this is by far the most normal and natural thing ever. And we all just kind of went, whoa.
That's actually really cool.
It was so cool.
Yeah.
It was so cool to hear a young dad just embrace his fatherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's really awesome.
Like,
God bless him.
yeah.
Yeah.
And their new family. And you, Padre, what have you got? Top that.
Mine is Bishop Mark.
Oh.
So this, and this isn't just me scoring political points here.
Double points. First, you take on an episode that you suggest.
Yeah, that's right.
Now a name dropping.
Yes, exactly. So, no, look, I'm grateful for him having said yes to being bishop of this diocese.
Yeah.
I mean, he brings a unique approach, and as you'd expect, bishop and the administrator of the cathedral don't always agree on everything. We just and that's it's
human.
It's because we're human. It's because we come from different generations.
Yeah, sure.
It's because we've had different training.
Sure.
That's just life in general. I mean, when you have differences of that kind, you're bound to disagree on certain things.
Yeah.
But it's marvelous knowing that I'm able to disagree, that he's able to disagree, and that we can still have in common Christ our Lord and his church, and know that both of us are coming from a place that we love the Lord, and that we want to serve him and do his flock justice. And that is something that our bishop has in spades.
Yes.
He has that in
100%.
spades. He loves the Lord.
Yes.
He wants to serve the church, and it's something that consistently comes across. And so I'm very grateful for his presence in our diocese because of that. Even in the moments where I find myself disagreeing with a particular approach or a particular decision, there's never any doubt at any point that the whatever the disagreements may be, it's not a core disagreement. It's not a disagreement which is core level. It's a disagreement which is peripheral level, if that makes sense. And because at the core, there is still that agreement of Christ is central, and the service of his flock must always be carried out in fidelity to the Lord. And so for that, I'm very, very grateful. Thank you, Bishop Mark.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think you tied there. You did well.
Tied.
You tied.
Nice.
You did well. No, but we're very blessed to have the bishop.
We are.
Praise God for that.
Amen.
Alrighty, well, thanks so much for joining us for this first episode of season 4 of the Living Fullness podcast. We're so excited to be back. We will see you again next week, but until then,
God bless.